Welcome back to another episode featuring a conversation with road and track writer Robert Sorokanich. Brought to you by APiDA Online, this is Offtrack. When I first started, I got a lot of hate. Well, there's a lot of positive stuff, but there was a lot of people that were just like vitriolic and angry about what's essentially opinions about cars.
Right, yeah.
About cars that neither of us own.
Yeah.
And people were just really up in arms about how could you say this?
Right,
and
your opinion's wrong because it's different from mine.
Yeah. And not only that, it's how dare the organization that hired you, how dare they have a person that has such views?
Right.
It's just insane to me how people think that you are now an authority on a certain subject, and they must have it known because this injustice can go no longer.
When I first started writing for the internet, everybody I spoke to told me, don't read the comments. And I
think you have to.
I get such a sick pleasure out of reading the comments, and even worse, like getting in there and just throwing it back at them. You know, nothing to me, and this is such a sick, twisted habit of mine, and it will drive me to an early grave. But I just love finding stupid comments, misguided comments, you know, people who are purposefully in the comment section to stir shit up, and just coming back at them. And I don't do it unless I have something valid to say. Right. I never get involved in the, well, you're dumb because this. Well, you're dumb because this, you know?
Look at your screen name.
Right, exactly. Oh, your avatar is a Pokemon. You can't be taken seriously. I never get involved with it at that level. But if somebody questions reporting that I've done that I can back up, or if somebody has a legitimate beef with an opinion that I have expressed, that I can defend. I love getting in there and mixing it up. And like, I don't want to make it sound like it's a vengeful thing. A lot of times I've had really good, really helpful conversations with commenters, you know, and it's come out where, you know, I'll write something and maybe I've not clearly expressed my opinion, or maybe I've written something in such a way that it could be read one of two different ways, and it's ambiguous. If a commenter comes in and reads it and says, well, this is unclear, and argues it in a well thought out way, that's useful to me, because it tells me that people are reading, it tells me that people are paying attention, and it helps me to avoid making that mistake in the future. And I own up to that, you know? If I've made a mistake in a piece of reporting and somebody points it out to me, I try not to hide that fact.
Right, and that's the only way you get better, really.
Right, yeah, because, and I mean, that's the great thing about having an audience that's empowered to talk back to you or to converse with you. And I mean, talking back and having a conversation are two different things. Right. But there's the potential for both, and when it's done well and when it's done in a civil way, that's something that our forebears in the print world never had the ability to do. Yeah, of course. So. I mean, they had probably letters from readers at one point, but right, 3 months later. So what does APiDA stand for? Well, APiDA stands for Automotive Performance Index Database and Answers. So it's an acronym. Okay. And I wanted to that kind of solves that. It's a knowledge hub for cars. That's what I bill it to be. That's what I want it to be. But I actually wanted to ask you about the commenting thing that you just got done talking about. DeMuro, he wrote an article about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I know exactly where this is going. Yeah, he wrote an article about why California is a horrible state for car laws. Right. And he cited the emissions requirements for the state. Now, usually what happens in a state is they have a rolling emissions cutoff, meaning 25 years before today, any car made after that would have to be tested for emissions. But any car before that
would be essentially exempt from emissions, right?
And it rolls so that when
Yeah.
when your car hits its 25th birthday,
Yeah.
it becomes exempt.
Exactly. But California doesn't have that. California just has anything before 1975 is exempt, anything after is not.
Right.
DeMuro said that if you had a 1977 Lamborghini Countach, it would be subject to the same emissions requirements as a, like a brand new GMC Yukon or something.
Right, yeah.
And you took issue with that. Why was that?
So the way that he had it written, and I can't quote it word for word, but the way that he had it written, I read it as your 1977 will be subject to the same emissions test as a 2014 or 2015.
Right.
And that can't possibly be true because you can't, a modern car for emission testing, you have to plug in the computer. There's no place to plug it in on a 1977. That just does not exist.
Right.
But also, it would be unfathomable for a state to write a law that said that your old piece of equipment needs to meet the new, more stringent requirements of equipment built 25 years after it. And, when I read that, I thought that what Doug was saying was your 1977 will be held to the same standard as a 2015, meaning that your car that was built in the Carter administration would somehow be expected to run as cleanly as a 2015 car. And that's the way I read what he wrote.
I think that's what he meant. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that's the way I read it as well. Here's where we get into weird kind of semantics arguments, because with diesels, they actually did do that. They said that you have to retrofit your diesel vehicle in a way where it now has to comply with certain clean air standards. So they did that with diesels. Now, I don't know if they did that with gas engines.
I'm not familiar with the diesel bit, but
I know the gas engines. They had, there was a commenter that said, no, you have to, I have a 1977 Ford Bronco, and I just have to, abide by the emission standards of 1977.
Right, yeah. Which is what I was...
Which does make sense.
Yeah, which is what I was trying to highlight that fact in my comment to Doug, and readers came in and backed me up, and I was thankful for that, because I don't know the inner workings of California's emissions laws, because I've never lived in California, and I've never registered a car in California. But just from a purely logical standpoint, and I know there are people who will say that state governments don't operate on logic, but even a state
It's
government,
like bird law.
even a state government can't. You can't think that a state government is so brainwashed as to pass a law that says you need to essentially buy a new car every year, because if you have an old car, it won't pass our standard. And that would basically be what the law would say if it was that your 1977 car had to be as clean as a 2015 car. That law would basically be requiring you to buy a new car every year. And they can't do that. Think about, in any case, whenever a new law is passed, there is a grandfather clause which says that, anything that happened before this law was passed cannot be persecuted under this new law.
Well, with the diesel thing, they did. I think the diesel had more to do with the fact that they were changing the fuel in the state. They're changing the makeup of the fuel to include more bio, whatever.
Right. So that's
and it burned differently.
Right. So that's different. If you have a car that burns pre-change diesel. Now we have ultra low sulfur diesel.
Yeah.
And if you have a car that can't run on ultra low sulfur diesel, it's like having a car that required leaded gas when we switched to unleaded.
Unleaded, right.
That still, though, is different from saying if your car did not have, a urea injection system, you have to go out and figure out a way to rig up a urea injection system. No, there's no law that could make that legal, because I know this is terrifying to think about, but not everybody works on their own cars. And
right.
you can't you can't write a law that requires somebody who owns a bone stock car to change their car. And I mean, I will put this out there to the internet and say that anybody who can give me an example of a law that required somebody to make a substantial change to their bone stock, factory stock car, I don't think there's any example of that law.
Well, roundabout there is. I mean, because California has different emissions requirements, so there is an example of a car that's 49 state legal, but it isn't 50 state legal because it doesn't have the, say, a pre-catalytic converter,
right?
Catalytic converter before the actual main cat.
Right, but anybody who bought that car in California bought the California legal car.
Yeah.
So
okay.
yeah, so there is one halfway towards an example of that, which is where.
No, but I know what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, like if you own a 1923 Model T, you're not required to put seatbelts in it. You're not required to have two headlights and two taillights.
This car's fucking unsafe.
Yeah. The problem is, where do you mount it to? Because the car's made out of pressed tin and wood. But I mean, there's a perfect example. The Model Ts only had one taillight. You only need one taillight to register that car. Yeah. You don't need to have two headlights and two taillights and turn signals like you would on a 2015 car.
Right.
Because the law, as it was in 1923, if there even was one, only required one taillight. So that's, aside from that, I think Doug's a great guy.
Okay, so I'm going to schedule the fist fight between you and Doug. And we'll see who comes out the victor, and that's how we determine things on the internet.
Have him drive the Hummer to me, and it'll be a throwdown.
I want to drive that thing so bad. It looks so ridiculous and stupid.
So the thing that blew my mind the most was when Doug made it known to the world that the H1 Hummer is the same width as like a Ford F-150, brand new Ford F-150.
It's actually shorter than like the Econoline van.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind because I remember I have the issue of, I think it was Truck Trend, which was Motor Trend's truck spin-off magazine, where they first road tested the first H1 Hummer when it was first being sold to civilians.
Right.
And they had this iconic photo of an H1 next to a Freightliner tractor.
Okay.
And they were within spitting distance of being the same width. And the H1, when it first came out, was so mind-bogglingly big compared to every normal car that you saw on the road.
Right.
So Doug wrote that thing comparing the dimensions of the H1 to normal trucks and vans that you can buy today.
And it was actually narrow. Well, no, it's narrower than a van, right?
Right.
But it's shorter in its like wheelbase or its total length than a Camry.
Right, which is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And so, after Doug wrote that, I was at a Cars and Coffee event in Connecticut, and somebody brought an H1. And it's so funny how something you read online can just change your entire perspective. Because here I am standing in front of this H1, which I've always thought to myself, this is fucking gargantuan. And I've just read this thing that Doug wrote, and now I'm standing in front of it, and I'm going, well, it's wide, but it's not that wide. And I can see over the roof, whereas I can't see over the roof of most minivans and like the Cadillac Escalade. And it really,
I think it has to do with proportion.
Yeah, because it looks so big and so boxy, and it's got exposed rivets and exposed door hinges and giant wheels and tires. And you look at it and your brain just says, this has to be huge. The same thing with the G-Wagon. I had a G-Wagon over the winter, and I parked it next to a Jeep Liberty, like a 2009 Liberty, the boxier one. And they were within the same sort of region as far as length and width. The G-Wagon was taller, but because the G-Wagon is big and boxy, and everything's pushed out to the corners, and and nothing is rounded off whatsoever, it looks like you're driving an apartment. And
well, to be honest, I mean they've been making the car for 100 years, so you probably are driving an apartment.
Yeah,
just technologically.
it's basically a log cabin that happens to have a V8.
All right. Well, I guess on that note, I think we can end.
We are right at my house. This was a good drive.
Yeah, it was a good drive. Let's do it again. I'm gonna let this guy pass. I'm gonna put on my turn signals.
Do they all work?
They actually all do work. I don't get any malfunction lights or anything.
Nice.
But yeah, let's do this again.
Absolutely.
Where can people follow you?
So I'm on Twitter at rsorokanich, Sorokanich.
Link in the description below.
Thank you. You can also find my work on roadandtrack.com and carandriver.com.
All right. Well, there you go. It's been a pleasure, and thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye. All right, I hope you enjoyed the time with our guest because that was the last episode. But before we end, here's a question. What was your favorite part of the conversation? You can leave a response in the comments down below to let us know what you think. Be sure to follow Bob on Twitter to keep up with his frankly amazing automotive writing. And hit the subscribe button right on top of me to see more conversations with awesome people. Thanks for watching.